Hello and welcome to Sanbaka. This is a series of videos where we go over each of the Diva teams in WIXOSS Diva format at a high level. If you are new to the game, you're trying to figure out which team is right for you. If you are maybe switching teams from a different team, you want to see what other options are available, then this is the series for you. Sanbaka is by far the most unusual team in Diva format. In addition to the L-Rigs, all of the Signy that are focused alongside them are VTuber characters, so they actually exist outside of WeCross in some meaningful way. They have, channels you can follow and streams you can watch and that sort of thing. So that adds a little bit of extra lore emphasis to the team. Additionally, as a result of this, mechanically, all of those Signies are considered virtual Signy as a Signy type, and as we will look at some of the Signy here, they all sort of base themselves off of looking for or needing that type in some meaningful way. So as a result of this, Sanbaka is a little bit cannibalistic, for lack of a better term. They basically play the best with virtual Signy, so your card pool compared to basically all the other teams is far more limited. In exchange for this, you have some synergies that the other teams don't necessarily have access to. But the problem that goes along with that is that basically no new virtual Signy cards have been printed ever since the first set that came out, both in English and especially in Japan, which is several sets ahead at this point. So support for Sanbaka is limited moving forward, but that doesn't mean that the team is bad. If you are fans of the tuber characters themselves, you can use them in battle, which is kind of fun. So let's go over some of the L-Rigs and Signy to use based on what type of game plan you'd like to work with. We will start with the team piece as always. Samba Carnival piece that costs 5 has main phase timing. As long as your team is full Sanbaka, of course, you can put target Signy on your opponent's field into their trash, return a Signy to your opponent's field to its owner's hand, and add a virtual Signy from your trash to your hand. So it opens 2 lanes, fully denying any enter resources from those 2 lanes, which is extremely good. It also gives you some recursion back, which is a theme of the deck, as you'll see moving forward once we look at some of the other Signy. It's a good piece overall. It's a little expensive at 5. Overall, it's pretty good at clearing lanes. It's not always necessary, especially if you use Toko Center as your choice of Elrig. If you have either Ange or Lies, I would say absolutely this is very good. Toko doesn't need it quite as much because she has a lot of removal power on her own. Plus, a lot of the really good removal in Sanbaka is actually pasted on top of Signy, so the removal aspect isn't necessarily as important, but it's still costed well at 5. It's a pretty good value for what it is. It's definitely not as impactful as most of the other team pieces that exist. So this is one you potentially are free to skip if necessary. A lot of the really important synergies happen with Sanbaka through the Signy, so the piece isn't necessarily as big of a deal for them. Typically, we do release order for these, but since all of these center L-Rigs were actually released at basically the same time, I'm going to focus first on the one that's actually in the starter deck, which is Lies level 3. She has a once per turn action. Target virtual Signy on your field gets plus 2,000 power until the end of your opponent's next end phase. That's okay. Adding power is usually an ability that, for the most part, can be ignored, especially in white. And also, I mean, white and black are the Sanbaka colors. There's basically no Signy, especially the virtual Signy, that really care about having power boosts at all in any meaningful way. It kind of can get in the way of your opponent a little bit, but usually there are so many ways that they can get around it that having the extra power for the most part is unnecessary. She has an enter effect to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, reveal any number of virtual Signy and put them in your hand, and then the rest go on the bottom. This is really good for card filtering to try to get more virtual Signy to your hand. That's something Lies specifically is really good at, as we'll look at her assists. Overall, it's not the kind of ability you'd want to see on your center L-Rig. It's more of a really good assist type ability. Basically, overall, Lies doesn't really add anything to any meaningful game plan. Even in the center, she's more of a support piece to try to get your other virtual Signy on the field, which overall tends to lean her at being a just generally lower power level, especially compared to the other two, even within Sanbaka. We'll stay on the white side of things with Ange level 3. She has a once per turn ability to give target virtual Signy on your field plus 4,000 power until end of turn. So much like Lies, this ability is pretty irrelevant. It's even more irrelevant in the fact that it only lasts until the end of your turn, so you don't even get the power boost defensively. There are so many things that we will see that Sanbaka has to allow for removal and options with their Signy that having the extra power is basically meaningless. This ability is pretty much just totally irrelevant all the time. She does have an enter ability to return target Signy on your opponent's field to its owner's hand and draw a card. So a little bit of card advantage. Also, removal is really good. It denies some enter effects with that removal, which is pretty good. It's a decent effect. I would say Ange is better than Lies overall as center. She's better at controlling, especially, which is something that Lies doesn't have access to. But overall, I think Toko is probably the better center. And speaking of Toko, here's Toko. Once per turn, she has an ability to put a virtual Signy on your field into its owner's trash to give target Signy on your opponent's field minus 3,000 power until end of turn. This is an extremely powerful ability. Having removal printed on your center Elrig is something that's very strong. Minus 3k doesn't sound like a lot, but there's a lot of other subtraction effects that the virtual Signy package tends to have addition to all of these effects. So when you can compound them on top of each other, basically all of that stuff adds up to kind of getting you over the thresholds and allowing you to clear out your field, your opponent's field every time and just swing in for guaranteed Signy damage turn after turn. She also has an enter effect to add up to 2 target virtual Signy from your trash to your hand. This is also extremely powerful. It allows you to play a lot of your virtual Signy that you may want later, like combo pieces, early in the game, and then once you grow to 3, you can bring them back. You can get a lot of extra mileage out of something like a Melissa, which is we will see in the future. Um, really good at basically doubling up on the cards you draw. Having recursion, especially in this deck, is very good. Both of Toko's abilities are very powerful for what the deck wants to do, and for the most part, I think the best Sanbaka decks will run Toko Center. For the assists, we'll keep looking at Toko here. Her level 1 assist, target Signy your opponent's field gets minus 8k power until end of turn. It's not bad. I mean, it's basically another removal level 1 Signy, so it's sort of par for the course. 8k is a little low. A lot of this, there's other effects that have this. Musica has a 10k one for the same cost, the same type of effect, so it's a little low, but the fact that you're pretty much always going to have something to target with this to clear a lane early on is fine. There's nothing really much else to say about that. Toko level 2, target Signy on your opponent's field gets minus 12k power until end of turn. You can pay an additional white to add a target white Signy from your trash to your hand. This is actually really good. It's one enter attack phase timing that allows you to potentially clear out one of your opponent's lanes, which will not only save you a life cloth but open the lane up on your field. This assist is pretty potent. If you want to run and center, this is assist that will really help you carry out through the rest of the game. It's a really good control option. The fact that you can pay an extra white to recur something back to your hand is also good value. And also the fact that this only costs 1 to grow naturally is also very good. So very efficiently costed, pretty powerful effect, good timing. It's a pretty good assist overall. Next up, we'll move back to Ange. Her enter on her level 1 is to return target level 2 or less Signy on your opponent's field to its owner's hand. It's a very good, efficient, I mean, it's 0 to grow. It's basically exactly what you'd want for a level 1 removal assist, especially in white. It does potentially have the downside that it may allow your opponent to use that card a second time if it has an enter ability. But if you're careful enough with it, you can target something that doesn't matter, and basically it's just free removal and lane opening while also denying enter, which is very important for Sanbaka in particular. The level 2 we're looking at here is 2 to grow, attack phase timing, return target Signy on your opponent's field to its owner's hand. Basically exactly what you'd want for good level 2 removal. It's 2 to grow, again, denies enter by sending it back to hand as opposed to vanishing it. She also, you can pay a black as well to add target black Signy from your trash to your hand. So again, much like the Toko one, this has options for recursion to allow you to bring cards that you may need back to your hand. This is just a really good assist. It has a lot of, both of the modes are very useful overall, pretty efficiently costed, good resource denial by not allowing your opponent to enter charge off of it. So this one also does a lot of really good things. Finally, for the Lies assists, The level one I've chosen is to look at the top 7 cards of your deck, reveal up to 2 black virtual signy, and add them to your hand, and then the rest go on the bottom. The other level one she has is basically identical to this, except it grabs white instead of black, and it trashes them instead of puts them on the bottom for the ones that you don't choose. Um, Most of the virtual signy that are really good just happen to be black, so this assist in general tends to be better overall. You can choose the white one if you want your deck to be more white leaning, and it's kind of flexible in that regard, but in most cases, this is going to be the one that you want to use. For level 2, 2 to grow, attack phase timing, so obviously pretty good rates, good timing. You can return target signy on your opponent's field to their hand. You can additionally pay a white and 1 to add a servant back to your hand. Um, Much like the Angesis, this has 2 modes that are both really good. Lane clearing and resource denial on attack phase are both really good, especially for 2 enter, and the ability to pay 2 more and potentially save another damage by means of keeping a guard in your hand. That's also really good. So, as with all of the other Sanbaka level 2 assists, this one is a good choice in basically any deck you'd want to use it in. Even though Sanbaka tends to be limited to virtual signy, there are still a lot of options in them. I'm not going to go over them all. I'm basically only going to go over the 2 that I think are the most important to the build, and then you can kind of fill in the rest around it. We're going to start off with Melissa Kinrenka, um, arguably one of the strongest signy in the game right now, despite the fact that she's level 1 and rather unassuming on power levels. Her constant ability is if there are 5 or more virtual signy in your trash, it gets plus 5k power, which doesn't seem like a lot on its own, but she also has the enter effect to put the top 3 cards of your deck into your trash. So if you are running a deck that is basically all virtual signy, which is kind of the Sanbaka thing, it's pretty reliable to get Melissa to be a 7k level 1 signy, which is very hard to remove. It dodges both Lancelot and Romail, which are 2 of the really good removal options right now. The fact that she also mills your deck out to kind of fuel maybe the Toko enter ability or either of the assist abilities to pull Signy back from your trash to your hand. She basically does everything that the deck wants to do, in addition to being a very high power body for just a level 1 Signy. So she's just great overall. And finally, I wanted to mention Rina Yarumi. She has an auto effect that when she attacks until end of turn, all Signy in your opponent's field get minus 1k for each virtual Signy on your field. So theoretically, this would always be 3. So basically, once Rina attacks, your opponent's entire board gets minus 3k. If you happen to have 2 of them, obviously that's minus 6, and you can start really hitting some interesting thresholds. She also has an enter effect. If you have Fuyuki Hakase on your field, target Signy on your opponent's field gets minus 4k until end of turn. So if you combine these 2 effects, if you combine Toko's center once per turn ability to subtract power, basically Rina plus Toko means that your opponent is going to have real trouble keeping any Signy on their field to survive any onslaught. And basically you can just banish them through these subtraction effects and then attack in and get some damage in that way. So the ultimate problem with this effect is that there is so much vanishing that happens that you do tend to pump up your opponent's enter sources way high. The big problem that I've faced when playing Sanbaka is that my opponent just has so much enter all the time because I'm vanishing so much and then crushing life cloth, that kind of thing. So do be wary of that. But all that being said, the fact that Rina basically by herself can kind of clear out an opponent's entire field if you have, 1 or 2 of them on the field and kind of time your attacks in certain ways. The other downside is that Rina, because her removal is attack phase timing, if you are kind of counting on that, there are certain attack phase Elrigs that can stop you in your tracks. Basically, if you can kind of subtract, if you do the math in such a way that your opponent's has 3 Signy that have 3k all or less, and still exists on the field, if your opponent removes the 1 Rini you have, then all of a sudden, instead of having 3 open lanes, you have 0. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So it's not necessarily the easiest to use all of the time, but overall, very high power level, extremely efficient removal. It doesn't cost any enter to use any of her removal effects. So it's a constant pressure force that your opponent will always have to react to and respect. I'll also briefly mention Himawari Hanma. She has an auto effect that at the beginning of your opponent's main phase, you reveal the top card of your deck. If it is a virtual Signy, then she will gain Shadow until end of turn, which is a very powerful ability. She also has a once per turn action, pay a white to look at the top 3 cards of your deck. grab a Signy, reveal a Signy, and add it to your hand, and then you put one of the cards on top of your deck and the rest on the bottom. It's good for refilling your hand if you need it. Sanbaka in general has so much card draw and different engines through recursion that they typically don't have a problem with it, but it's a nice option to have. Really, the reason I mention it is because it's a pretty good way to have a strong Signy that just has Shadow until end of turn. Um, Shadow is a pretty powerful ability. It's allow you to dodge a lot of potentially targeted removal effects. So whereas Rina Yurumi is sort of the offensive juggernaut of the Sanbaka game plan, Himawari is one that will really shore up your defenses. So if you want to have a more controlly or a slower build, then Himawari is one you should be looking at. And that is Sanbaka at a high level. Hopefully, that'll give you some insights into how to run the deck. As I alluded to before, unfortunately, there is no further virtual Signy support moving forward, at least at the moment. So, if you want to build the deck, you basically can build it with exactly the pieces you need and kind of use all of those moving forward without need to change. So, at that front, it is somewhat nice to have a deck built that doesn't really need a lot of changes to it. But at the same time, it does mean that this deck is very susceptible to power creep. It's already kind of falling off in power. It's not quite as potent as it used to be. And especially once the next couple of sets come out, it's really going to fall off and just have a hard time keeping up with the more conventional decks. So hopefully that doesn't necessarily dissuade you from using it. It's just things to keep in mind as potential struggles you will have in the future.